Alrighty, welcome back to mtgjantank.com. My name is Plum, and it is already time for another Brewers review, and this time for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the upcoming set that releases next week on, correct me if I'm wrong, but March 2nd, coming to Arena. Interesting set for sure. Our first Universes Beyond set of the year. Akin to Spider-Man and the like, but nonetheless, it has some very interesting cards that we're going to talk about today. And just as a reminder, this is MTG Jank Tank. I am not a professional. I am just a guy who likes to play fun cards and brew different decks. So we're just going to go through cards that piqued my interest, that caught my attention, and things I'm excited to test out in different shells and whatnot. So without further ado, let's get started with TMNT. So first up, we have the Last Ronin's Technique. This is a 4-mana instant with the new mechanic Sneak, which is basically ninjutsu, but it applies to spells and things like that as well. So you can cast it for its Sneak cost if you also return an unblocked attacker you control the hand during the declare blocker step. In this case, this creates 3 1/1 white Ninja Turtle spirit creature tokens. If its Sneak cost was paid, they enter tapped and attacking. So when I saw this card, my mind immediately kind of went to Spectral Possession, which is an old modern card. 3 white mana, you get 3 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying. Obviously, the tokens made by Ronin's Technique is not as good. They don't have flying or anything like that, but the ability to cast it for just 2 mana to get 3 power on the board in a token shell is a better rate than Lingering Souls. Plus, it plays well with like Intangible Virtue. Not sure it's enough to bring tokens as an archetype to Historic or Timeless, whatever you want to say, but it does play rather well with Mobilize, because let's say you go turn 1 Stadium Headliner, you swing, you get your Mobilize token. On turn 2, then you could sneak, bouncing the token back to your hands and putting in 3 tokens instead and hitting for 4 damage on turn 2, plus you get 3 extra bodies. Follow that up with like an Intangible Virtue, like I said, and suddenly you're adding a lot of power to the board. Of course, it plays well with like Voice of Victory and stuff like that too. Since you're already in white, Guide of Souls, Ocelot Pride's making a lot of tokens, that sort of stuff. So we'll see how it goes. I think for the most part, you're not going to be playing something that necessarily tries to abuse the Sneak mechanic. Like Guide of Souls, obviously you want more things entering the battlefield and whatnot, but I think when you're playing something like the Mobilize mechanic, you don't really care if you're upgrading 1 token into 3. You're not going to try and play like an Ornithopter or something just to not lose value. But nonetheless, I think this is quite a good rate for 3 tokens at 2 mana, despite the bounce effect. But I'm interested to see where this goes, especially in like this red-white sort of shell, because I don't think tokens hasn't been super viable in a long time, or ever in Historic. But I'm gonna try and make this work for sure. There is a cycle of new class enchantments. Some of them are interesting, some of them are not, but I wanted to give them all separate slides. This is Leader's Talent. Whenever you attack, you put a counter on target attacking creature. Level 2, whenever a creature leaves the battlefield, if it had a counter on it, you gain some life. And then for 4 mana, level it up to level 3. Whenever you cast a spell, you put a counter on each creature you control. So the level 4 is, quite a bit of mana. The level 3 is quite a bit of mana at 4, but it kind of ends the game once you get it going. This is very comparable to Innkeeper's Talent. I do like that Leader's Talent you can curve. I don't necessarily see a situation where you play this on 2, level it up on 3, level it up on 4 without committing more to the board. And the second ability probably isn't nearly as good as giving all your stuff Ward 1 like Innkeeper's Talent. But they do play a similar role. I don't know if there's some sort of counters deck that wants to be playing both of these. Maybe. Whatever. You have to attack to get the trigger on this one, which makes it a little worse than Innkeeper's Talent as well. But you'll see there is a lot of +1/+1 counter synergy in TMNT. or I think the Secro is just TMT, so we'll talk about counters quite a bit. But, you know, it's a good rate for a enchantment that does a lot of stuff, so it's worth mentioning at least once. Next up, I kind of paired these together. Two versions of Leonardo. The first one is 3 mana, the second one's 2 mana. They both have Sneak for a single white. The first one just gets +1/+0 for each other creature you control, and the second one is basically an Ajani's Pridemate, so whenever you gain life, you get a counter on it, except it also has lifelink. Now, these aren't, like, super impressive on their own, but we have been quite successful with a list like you see on screen, like a mono-white weenie legendaries list. Of course, Ajani Nakata Pariah is now banned, but we still have Guide of Souls and Ocelot Pride. And these are just some additional really cheap legendaries that we can play in this deck that also power up Mox Amber, so we can spam the board even quicker. And when you're playing something like Leonardo alongside, you know, Ocelot Pride that's making tokens every turn, or you're able to flood the board and get like 3 or 4 creatures in the early turns, this is actually a decent threat for just 1 mana. So I think we'll try some sort of Eternal White Weenie. I don't even know what we'll call it. I'm not sure they're going to do anything better than what we already have, like Isamaru, Kithian, Basri, that kind of stuff. But I think it's definitely worth testing out because just mainly for the fact that they're both legendary to play better with Mox Amber. And then they also get powered up by Flowering of the White Tree as well. This could also, like I said, just be put in a life gain deck alongside Ajani's Pridemate and Voice of the Blessed. I don't know if you need additional copies of those in Historic at the moment, but it's always nice to have some redundancy. Leonardo's technique is interesting. It's a 4 mana Coco that brings things back from the graveyard, but you can sneak it for 2 mana. So I'm not exactly sure what kind of deck wants this. We have Recommission in the format. We also have Dewdrop Cure, which is 3 mana. Return up to 2 target creatures with mana 2 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield. If you gift a card to your opponent, you get to get 3 creatures. So play a very similar role, but this one's cheaper and goes up 1 mana value. So you can return to like a Scurry Oak plus something else, a Heliod, or I don't know, whatever you want to say, another 3 mana creature. But it's also sorcery speed, and you have to already have something in the board. So I guess it's cool if you're just like getting some sacrifice value and stuff. And it's good to recover after a board wipe to get back whatever you dropped in your graveyard. But at the same time, I don't know. It's a really cheap cost for that kind of effect. I'm just not exactly sure where I would want to put it. Maybe in some sort of black-white Marionette Apprentice shell. Or like I said, some sort of combo technique that can easily snag things back if they eat removal. But 2 mana for 6 mana value worth of creatures is pretty good. Pretty good in my opinion. So we'll see what people like to do with that. April Neil Hacktivist is rather interesting. Might be a little slow for Historic, but it's a 4 mana 1/5. It's also a human. And says, beginning of your end step, draw a card for each card type among spells you've cast this turn. It's possible you could play this in some sort of like artifact shell, where like if you have like an Ornithopter, an Emery, like this counts as 2 types right there. You could be playing, you know, counter spells, instants, sorceries, that sort of stuff. Donatello's technique we'll talk about in a second, but this is kind of like a color shifted Village Rites if you bounce a creature. So I feel like this has the potential to get a lot of value, but we also still have the 1 ring in Historic, albeit a bit nerfed. But I think it's, I don't know, it competes for that same slot. It dies to a lot more, but you also have the potential to draw a lot of cards, sort of chaining each turn together without the damage. So we'll see how that goes. It's also in mono blue, which is kind of nice, but I don't know. I'm not sure it will make the cut, but it's an interesting card nonetheless in terms of like card advantage engines in the format. And when you already have like these lower to the ground artifact shells that are able to cast like Metallic Rebuke, Ornithopter, artifact creatures, instants, sorceries, with what they're already doing, I think it might be pretty easy to slot her into a shell like that too. So we'll see what she does. Next up is another one of the enchantment classes. This is 2 mana. When it enters, you mill 2, draw 2, discard 2. When you level it up to level 2, you get to bring back 2 artifact cards from your graveyard to your hand. And at level 3 for 5 mana, you get to turn an artifact into a 3/3 creature. It is target artifact you control. So that means you can keep stacking those counters on the same creature over and over to make one big beefy guy. Now, immediately, like, just off the first level when you play it, the ETB effects, like, that's pretty sweet for Reanimator shells. Being able to draw, discard, and mill 2, that puts 4 cards in your graveyard on turn 2, which then we already know Persist is rather popular in Historic format. I don't even know if you need the rest of the deck. Like, you could obviously make some sort of, like, Reanimator-esque artifact shell, where your main Persist targets are, it could be anything. It could be, like, Wormcoil Engine, or Platinum Angel to get around the non-legendary clause. But then you can get some additional value as level 2 and level 3 come up throughout the game. But along with that, just some other cards thinking, like, this is really good value with Estrid's Invitation. You know, you curve 2 into 3, copy this every turn to just, like, churn through your deck a lot. And then lastly, we've played a deck, I think we made the Mythic a while ago, where we played Wizard class with, like, Benthic Biomancer combo and Laboratory Maniac as our win con, but then we also played, like, Enigma Jewel, Omen Hawker, and Storm Chaser's talent, just because Jewel plus Hawker gives you so much mana to sink into activated abilities. And now we have a third class that also kind of cares about artifacts, like Enigma Jewel, where, like, instead of 8 classes, maybe we play a 12 class list, and we're just able to, like, level up our cards really fast and just get, like, crazy value out of them very early in the game. Some people have tried shells similar with, like, Lockmare and stuff recently from Lorwyn, so maybe we can sort of make some sort of hybrid between those two. But we'll probably give it a spin. But nonetheless, like, this card feels really nutty for a graveyard strategy. In the same way, it's kind of, in my mind, parallel to something like Malevolent Rumble, where you trade out that token for additional value that you can, you know, sink your mana into, but each of them can dump 4 cards in the yard. But obviously this is blue, so it comes up a little more differently in some other decks. Plus it's enchantment, which can help turn on Delirium and stuff like that too. So very, very cool card. I want to see where people put it, and I think it will spark some play in a lot of different shells. Next up is Donatello Gadget Master. 2 mana, or I'm sorry, it's a 3 mana 3/2, and then you can sneak it for a colorless and a blue, and then when it deals damage to a player, you get a copy of target artifact you control. Little wonky, because again, you have to bounce something back to your hand for sneak. I could see it in a weird mill shell, where, like, you turn 1 Ruin Crab, turn 2 Mesmeric Orb, your opponent doesn't expect you to swing with a crab, so you swing with the crab, they don't block, and then you just, you know, sneak in a Donatello and copy your orb, and then suddenly you're milling double. I don't know. There's also, like, River Churn Monument and things like that, where you can start, like, copying those and firing off mill in that sort of way. But it's also just a 3/2 for 3. And you have to, mill probably doesn't want to play that many creatures besides your crabs. And maybe Bruvax, so a little weird of a balance. I don't know if it's going to spawn sort of like a lateral archetype to mill, or what I say, kind of shell to mill. But possible. There's another card in here we'll talk about in a moment that also powers up mill a bit too, so maybe it goes back to more creature based. But you do need to play artifacts to make that worth it. So the other one was Simulacrum Synthesizer. Obviously, if you're playing, you know, a cheap affinity style list, you could play Ornithopter and be able to swing with that and have it not be blocked, so you can easily sneak in Donatello. You could also even play like Gingerbrute or something like that, and then you can start late game like copying your Simulacrum Synthesizers. which just start sort of chaining together and snowballing. I don't know if you want all 4 of these, probably not, but it's a nice piece of tech you could have in like a different style Infinity Shell, in my opinion. We talked about Donatello's technique a little bit earlier. It's basically a color shifted village rites. Like, it's a divination, so you can cast it for 3 mana as a sorcery, but in the same way, like, you're removing a creature from the board, although you do get to bring it back to your hand, which is pretty good. So you can reuse enter the battlefield effects, and then you just draw 2 cards. It's nice that it's in mono blue. Some sort of temple shell might like it, but it has some nice versatility that you can cast it either or on turn, 2 if you sneak it, or late game you can just cast it for 3 mana and draw 2 cards. I don't know, just a nice, again, sort of adjacent card, color shifted, that a lot of decks might want to take advantage of. This card is more a fun one for me. I've been trying to make like a mono blue martyrs, aka like a Gregory Hatch style deck, work for quite a while, with like Wrath and cheap counter spells, and then this creature suite you see on board with like Mausoleum Wanderer, Judge's Familiar, Siren Storm Tamer. So this is kind of like another Siren Storm Tamer, a 1 mana 1/1 fugitive droid, robot scientist, artifact creature. Can't be blocked if an artifact entered the battlefield under your control this turn, and then you can sack it for a blue to counter target spell that targets an artifact or creature you control. So basically, again, it's just like another version of Siren Storm Tamer. Storm Tamer copies 5 through 8, but you get additional artifact synergies. So if you throw like a Shadow Spear on it, or you're, dropping Seed of the Synod, it kind of plays like that Ginger Brute role where you can, swing in unblockable with the added benefit of having this additional ability to counter something and protect other threats as well. So just a simple little 1/1, but it keeps my dream alive, and I'm going to try and play it anyways, but we'll see how that goes. This is the other mill card I was talking about. This is 6 mana instant. You can sneak it for 2, and target opponent mills half their library rounded up. That is a crazy, crazy rate to mill 30-ish cards, or a little less, I should say. But we talked about it in mill, where you can do an unblocked Ruin Crab and stuff like that. But there is ninjas going around, but ninjas kind of evolved from rogues, which isn't as played as much. But a lot of the time, a secondary win condition for that blue-black rogues list that played like Soaring Thought Thief and Thieves Guild Enforcer and Outcast was just milling your opponent out with like Enforcer and Soaring Thought Thief triggers. So, I mean, you can, both of these have flash. You're playing Ruin Crab anyways. If you play Outcast as another rogue, like, it's really easy to flash a card in and swing freely, or flash this guy in, swing with flying. This is unblockable by itself, to just mill your opponent for half their worth and then finish them off with your creatures. Like, the deck has removal, counter spells. You have to play Drown in the Lock. That gets turned on like right away with this technique. So we might see a bit of a revival of that, or at least I'm going to try and revive it with this card. But overall, again, it's a crazy rate, and like, it probably isn't a bad idea to play like Surgical and something in that kind of shell either, just to remove your opponent's best cards, especially against combo and stuff, where you get to chunk them for a big point of their library and just like take their best card. That seems pretty good to me. I don't know. We'll see if it's worth it, but we have Archive Trap and Historic too. So maybe there can be some, like I said earlier, like a hybridized version where instead of, just straight rogues, you start, bringing in more mill elements and trying to win through mill more often. But we'll see. We'll try it out, definitely. We already have a lot of this on stream, so I'm excited for this one especially. Krang Mastermind is an 8 mana 1/4, has affinity for artifacts, so hopefully most of the time you're casting it for just 2 blue. When it enters, if you have fewer than 4 cards in hand, you draw cards equal to the difference, which makes it a great late game top deck. And then it gets +1/+1 for each other artifact control. So let's say you have 6 artifacts, which means you have affinity equal to 6. You cast it for 2 mana, and then suddenly you have a 7/4. Very similar to Copper Cannoneer. Again, it doesn't have the unblockability. It doesn't grow unless you play more artifacts, which Copper Cannoneer does the same thing. Doesn't have the ward, but I think the ability to top that this later on when you have nothing in hand and just draw 4 cards is crazy for 2 mana. Very Thought Monitor-esque. Might spawn some sort of new affinity build with both of these. I think it works pretty well with Emissary Escort, which I don't think anyone plays. But spam the early game really quick. This is a 2 mana 0/4 that gets plus X plus O, where X is the greatest mana value among other artifacts you control. So if you can get this down on like turn 3 or 4, suddenly you have 8/4 for 2 mana. It's just like better Tarmogoyf, guys. But that's an interesting kind of style of shell. And then I'm also interested with a like legendary build. We played a lot of Tesserator last year with Golbez Crystal Collector, and like the ability like in the late game where you're just like churning through your deck with the artifact surveil triggers, and then you start returning things, and then the last line says if you control 8 or more artifacts, each opponent loses life equal to that card's power when you return a creature. In this shell, like, it's a little different with Krang Mastermind because it's going to have constant 1 power, but with like Copper Cannoneer, they're losing 4. And I think the ability to just constantly like churn Krang, swing in with it, it dies, you get to return it at your end step, cast it for 2 mana, draw more cards, seems pretty good to me. It's a little bit more grindier, so maybe we do try it in like a Tesserator shell, like I said. But it's definitely, I think it kind of both competes with the slot that Copper Cannoneer would be in, but also you could probably build some sort of shell that plays both. But you probably have to have quite a strong low end of your curve in order to power it out a little fast. Because affinity for 6 is a lot. But I don't know. He looks pretty good. Having Thought Monitor plus... Ooh, I don't know, chat. I think you're going to be able to draw a lot of cards if you have this in your affinity list. So we'll see how it goes. Sewer Valence Cam is a 1-mana flash artifact. When it enters or leaves the battlefield, you tap or untap target creature. You can pay for, sack it, draw 2 cards. I've been trying to figure out what to do with this shell, and the most obvious, or this card in what shell, and the most obvious is Emery, Lurker of the Lock, and Goblin Engineer. So the cool part is, like I said, it enters or leaves triggers to untap or tap something. So let's say you have Emery and, I don't know, some sort of sacrifice outlet, plus like a Mox Amber. Say you have like Arcbound Ravager. So you can, have your Emery out, Surveillance Cam. You can sack Surveillance Cam, untap a creature, whatever. Tap Emery to replay Surveillance Cam. When it comes back, untap Emery. Then you can sacrifice it to Arcbound Ravager. Tap Emery to return another artifact, a Mox Amber. Tap your Mox Amber. When Surveillance Cam leaves the battlefield, you get to untap Emery. Then you can tap your Mox Amber. Tap Emery again to bring back Surveillance Cam. Untap Emery, and you can just start doing some crazy shit. Kind of similar with Goblin Engineer. It's nice that you have like an Entomb stapled to it. But you can tap to sack Sewer Valence Cam, get back a 3-mana card. When Sewer Valence Cam leaves, you get to untap Goblin Engineer. Your 3-mana card comes back, and then if you have another red source, you can tap and you can loop a couple things that way. With Sewer Valence Cam, I was trying. I'm gonna have to sit down a little more, but there's some other interesting cards that you could do with. You could do silly things with here. Scrap Welder is a 3-mana 3/3. It's no Goblin Welder, let me tell you that. But you can sack an artifact with mana value X and then return target artifact with a mana value less than X. It gains haste until end of turn. That's a big hindrance, the less than X clause, but maybe there's something you could do. I would have to sit down and like look at what other options we have in Historic. You could probably do something kind of silly with Scrap Trawler. But similar to Goblin Welder, like you can constantly untap this, but at the moment, like you'd have to get back 0-cost things like Ornithopter or the like. So I don't know. It doesn't seem as good, But I'm sure there's some sort of chain where even if you can't go infinite, you can just get like a lot of value by like, I don't know, playing a corridor monitor, untapping scrap welder, sack corridor monitor, bring back sewer valence cam, untap scrap welder, sack sewer valence cam, untap scrap welder, bring back a zero cost thing, play the zero cost, and then go from there. With scrap trawler, you can bring back 2 things and start like doubling your effects. And then the only other card I was kind of just looking through is Pep Raucous Raider, which we just got in the Lorwyn Alchemy set. Whenever a creature you control deals damage to a player, exile the top card of that player's library. It becomes an artifact. It's a non-land permanent card, and then until end of turn you can play it. But you can also sack an artifact and add 3 mana of any one color. So if you have multiple stuff on the board, like you can play Pep. This is obviously Teamer colors. If you have Surveillance Cam, tap Pep, sack the Cam. That untaps Raucous Raider. Surveillance Cam is now in the graveyard, but you have 3 mana floating. Tap Raider, you know, to, I don't know, sack something else. Activate Goblin Engineer. Goblin Engineer brings back Surveillance Cam. Untaps Pep. Tap Pep, sack Surveillance Cam to untap Goblin Engineer. Float another 3 mana. Use one of those mana to tap Goblin Engineer to swap something with Surveillance Cam. Untap Raucous. So you can, I think you can loop Engineer plus Raucous Raider and net mana every time. And then just dump that into something, or go infinite with like a Fire Weaver and get infinite artifact ETBs as well. So obviously that's a 3-card combo, 3 colors, but if you're, you know, playing Emery, you can tutor for Cam with Goblin Engineer, and then I'm sure you could play like Springleaf Drum and stuff to help power up Pep a little faster. But I thought that was kind of interesting too. So I think there's a lot of different builds, a lot of different combos this is going to enable. We just kind of really dig into the card pool that Historic has and see if there's anything more interesting than Emery and Goblin Engineer. Curry of Comestibles. I'm kind of talking about multiple things here. This is a 2-mana 1/2. When it enters, you search for a food. If you don't, you make a food. Kind of inconspicuous. It's just a delivery driver. But I do want to point out there's a lot of food cards in this set as well. Marshmallow Pizza, Ice Cream Kitty, Everything Pizza, Omni Cheese Pizza, Spicy Oatmeal, Anchovy and Banana, Pizza Face, Gastromancer, and this tutors for all of them. Plus, we have things in Historic like Sir Ginger, Dubious Delicacy, Ariette's Tempting Apple. So instead of a toolbox, you can almost make like a lunchbox deck. Obviously, like Spicy Oatmeal Pizza is a removal spell, deals 4 damage to any target, 3 damage to you. Anchovy and Banana Pizza is just like a destroy target creature. It's a murder staple to a 4-mana enchantment. This lets you sack things and draw cards. This gives something +2/+2. You untap it. This draws a card when it enters, and then you can cycle some mana through it. This one lets you, pay 7 mana, sack it. Target player gains 3, draws a card. Each of your opponents discards a card. This artifact deals 3 damage to any target, and then you put 3 counters on a creature, and it finds you a basic land. So we're starting to get to a point, chat, I'm gonna be so honest, I hate that we're gonna be playing pizzas in Magic, but there are some interesting cards nonetheless to tutor for with this, especially some of these older things, and I find that very gross but also interesting at the same time. So I don't know if regular foods in general are gonna be strong enough to play and spawn a new archetype by themselves, but we also have like Feasting Troll King and Trail of Evidence, where like when you sacrifice foods, you're going to be able to pay an extra 1 and dig for more stuff. So maybe some sort of food list comes back to the surface, but I'm not counting on it. But it is a sweet little card to keep an eye out now that food seems somewhat of a deciduous mechanic, where like we see food tokens all the time now. And I think this is just one of those cards that gets like better and better as time goes on. But I don't know if it's ever going to be at a power level that's playable in Historic. So we'll see. It might surprise us, but you never know. Next up is Rat King Verminister. Did I say that right? 2-mana 1/1 legendary creature rat avatar. At the beginning of your end step, if a permanent left the battlefield under your control, you get a 1/1 rat and you put a counter on it. on Rat King. And then you can sack 3 rats, return target creature card and all their cards with the same name as that card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So, I saw some people compare this to like a Johnny, right? You get, let's say you like play that, you crack a Prismatic Vista on 2, play Rat King, you get a 1/1 rat, and then you obviously get chained plus a counter on that. So you get 3 power over 2 bodies. It kind of sucks that it's at the end step and not an ETB effect. But that's a pretty good rate that also just has some extra value stapled onto it. Of course, rat players have rat cards like Song and Swarm Piper, and we have some other rat cards, Pack Rat and stuff like that too. Relentless Rats. But I don't know how often you're actually be able to make this many rats and then return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. But that's relatively cheap, especially if you're in a specific rat deck or able to keep pulling that disappearment trigger off every turn. But the ability to get multiple creatures back is pretty good. It is kind of silly if you're playing Shadowborn Apostle somehow. I don't know what that deck would look like, but then you could bring back, you could like mill a bunch of apostles in the graveyard, make some rats, and then bring back every apostle from your graveyard and immediately sack to go get like something silly, Brizzlebrand. I don't know. That's the jank part of this card, but it is some pretty good value either way, and I'm excited to see if people will play that in like maybe Black White Blink, because it's just if a permanent left the battlefield, doesn't have to go in your graveyard or anything. So you could like Rat King, blink it with Philia, and then make a rat, put a counter on it, and stuff like that. Overlord of the Battlemerc finds it, plus mills cards into your graveyard. So it kind of slots in pretty easily to that deck, I think. But we'll see if it shows up anywhere else. Splinter Hamato Yoshi is pretty simple. 2 mana, 1/3, has sneak for a single black, menace. Other ninjas you control get +1/+1. Ninjas is actually somewhat popular again after the recent bannings. We already have discount Splinter at home with silver for master. And we have like Eureka that came in pretty recently. So I think this is just another good option for lords if that deck happens to want more lords. And it also lets you return things and do silly stuff with like ninjutsu mechanics. So pretty cool. That's all I'm gonna say. I like it. Splinter's Technique. 4 mana, search for a card, put that card in your hand, shuffle. You can sneak it for 2. So if you sneak it, it's Demonic Tutor. I don't know if that road deck would want to play something like that, but it could. But in other shells, I mean, you could definitely slot this into some sort of black aggro list and, you know, go find your next card on curve, or rebuy something with a decent ETB effect. If you're going a little bigger, like if you want to play a Devotion Shell, you could have a Nykthos out, swing with Gary, Grey Merchant of Asphodel, Splinter's Technique, go find another Grey Merchant of Asphodel or something, and then, you know, be able to double up on Gary's the following turn with a big Nykthos power up. Yeah, it might be a little more of a commander card, but it is a 2 mana tutor that returns something to your hand without killing it, which I think is pretty hot. Might not be quick enough for historic, or we might not have an exact shelf that wants to use it besides something like Devotion, but it's good to have either way. Casey Jones, Jury Raid Justicar. This is a 2/1 legendary for 2 with haste, and it's kind of just a color shifted Glintnest Crane or Ingenious Mist. So you look at the top 4, you can get an artifact in your hand, you put the rest on the bottom of your library. I like this card because 1, it works with Mox Amber and it finds Mox Amber, and 2, it is already sort of, it seems playable in an existing shell of Gleeful Demolition. And like that 8-whack kind of build. If you played like Foundry Street Denizen, which is that 1 mana goblin that gets bigger when a red creature enters, you can do some silly things where, like, let's say you have like a Gleeful Demolition where you turn 1, you know, play Bomat Courier, swing. Turn 2, Casey Jones, find Mox Amber, play Mox Amber, tap a red, Gleeful Demolition, your own Mox Amber, and then you have a 2/1 hasty creature to swing in, keep some pressure up, and then you make 3 additional tokens, and then you can follow up with like a bushwhacker or something the next turn. I don't know if that shell, you'd probably have to change some things around, because we also have like Kraz and stuff, so we don't have Ragavan, unfortunately, in Historic, but you might have to shift some creatures around to make Mox Amber workable in that kind of deck. But it seems kind of cool. You could even play like, you go back to like a Burning Tree Emissary build with Denizen, where you're chaining together multiple things. Plus, I mean, this also just finds like the Great Furnace or Darksteel Citadel, Ornithopter, Combust, whatever that 1 mana combustible card is, and things like that, or Synthesizer and stuff like that. So maybe not just Lethal Demolition, but it's cool to have something that digs that deep in red that's also on an aggressive body for like these artifact shells. So we're probably gonna brew something up with this bad boy as we go. Speaking of Casey Jones, there's another one that makes me even more excited, and that is Casey Jones Vigilante. 3 mana 4/3 legendary creature, Human Berserker. Human is relevant. When it enters, draw 3 cards. At the beginning of your next upkeep, discard 3 cards at random. So it's basically a delayed Burning Inquiry. We get half on one turn and then half on the next turn. Cool with Hollow One, if you're trying to do something like that, although you do have to wait a turn. But most notably is that the second thing is a separate trigger. So that means if Casey Jones gets removed before your next turn, you don't have to discard anything. That means you can consign to memory that second trigger, so you don't have to discard anything. And my mind went to, like, if you're playing consign to memory, you should also be playing Quantum Riddler, because then you can stop the warp trigger. And then you might as well play Prophecydetic Memory, because you're going to be drawing 3 cards. And, like, turn 2 Proft into turn 3 Casey Jones gives you a 7/6 if you dump... I'm sorry, no, you get a counter off Props... Oh, no, I lied. It's just 3 cards. But then you have a 7/6 on turn 3, and you refilled your hands. You could play... If you want to, like, also take advantage of this card, of course, you could throw in, like, Marauding Mako. You could play Flameblade Adept, Hollow One still. You could be playing Detectives Phoenix, so you can discard and dump that back onto Casey Jones and give him haste. But I'm actually super excited to try this sort of shell, this blue-red draw spells, cards, whatever you want to call it. I don't know. But I think you can do some very silly stuff with this, whether your opponent snipes it or not. It's a removal spell, cool, you gain 3, but I think you can also take advantage of the discard at random as well. Next up is another enchantment class, Cool But Rude. Whenever you attack, you may discard a card. If you do, you draw a card. Once you level it up for 2 mana, whenever you discard a card, it deals 2 damage to each opponent, and then you level it up for 2 mana again, and it's a gamble. So you search your library and grab a card and then discard a card at random. Card is spicy. Obviously, there's like Monument to Endurance. It does a lot. Very easy to level up, but at level 2, it staples on 2 damage to your discard, so you can start draining people for 5, which is kind of crazy. We've been playing Monument to Endurance in like a zombie infestation build, which has been a lot of fun, but maybe it's time to splash red, because this is a sweet 2-drop. It also could spawn some other new stuff. I saw a lot of people talk about Necro Dominance. So at the beginning of your end step, if you can pay any amount of life. If you do, you draw that many cards. Your maximum hand size is 5. If a card or token would be put into your graveyard for anywhere, blah, blah, blah. Exile instead. Max hand size is 5. So if you turn 2 Cool But Rude, you level it up, and then on one of your following turns, you cast Necro Dominance. Suddenly, you can, at your end step, you know, draw whatever you want to say, 15 cards, if you still have the life for it. And then your maximum hand size is only 5, so you have to discard 10 of those, and then whenever you discard a card, you deal 2 damage, so you can just dome someone for 20. Seems pretty sweet. Kind of a 2-card combo there in black and red, where you play Necro Dominance, where you can go big and play Shieldred, or you can try and stay low to the ground and do something sick with this. And then lastly, we have Tectonic Reformation. We tried to play like a Living Twister Monument deck. I don't know if anyone remembers what Living Twister does, but it was actually kind of sweet. But Tectonic Reformation, where like each land card in your hand has cycling, it's already in red. You can turn all of your land cards into 2 damage to your opponent. I don't know if there's anything there, but it crossed my mind, so I wanted to stick it in here just in case someone solves a deck like that. Improvised Arsenal, next one. 2 mana, artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+0 for each artifact you control. You can pay 5 to make a copy of this equipment, and then you can equip for red. Basically, a different version of Cranial Ram. Doesn't come on a body, but you have the added benefit of making additional copies in the late game. I don't know if Thopters would ever come back, but it's cool that like you could play red-white Thopters and have a Cranial Ram / Plating-esque card in your colors, so you don't have to splash. Throw this on an Ornithopter and you're swinging and hitting pretty hard, especially if you're curving well enough, where you get to like power it up with the 4/4 Ornithopter from Yodia Declares War. I think you could chip in damage pretty quick. And then lastly, it's kind of hot with Firebending Student in a way, where like, because this isn't sorcery speed, the copy effect, so if you throw this on a Firebending Student, let's say like you play Furnace and whatever, a Bowmat Courier on 1. I don't know why Bowmat Courier is my go-to, but play Courier on 1. You have 2 artifacts. You play Firebending Student on 2, and then swing, and then turn 3 you play Improvised Arsenal plus a land. You equip the Firebending Student, so that makes her a 2/3. You already have 3 artifacts, so that makes her a 5/3. And then you can swing Firebend for 5, and then immediately make a copy of that and hit for 6. So these two kind of pair really well together in like a low to the ground aggro shell, because she can snowball and continually make you additional copies of Improvised Arsenal. Is that a little too much? A little too slow to do? Maybe. But it's really cool, and I like the idea of playing these together with like Embercleave and stuff like that. So we'll probably test something out like that next week. Next up is Michelangelo Weirdness to 11. It's a 2 mana 1/1. When it enters, you get a mutagen token. We haven't talked about these yet, but these are just artifact tokens that have 1 tap, sack it, and you put a counter on target creature. And then just like a map token, it's only a sorcery. If 1 or more counters would be put on a creature you control, it gets an additional counter, +1. So really cool. It's basically another version of Hardened Scales. I'm starting to see Ouroboros show up more and more in Historic, where it's just kind of like one of those like Shieldred-esque cards where it's 4 mana, you drop it, and if they don't answer, it takes over the game, even though it doesn't have like an ETB. And this plays well with that. Starts increasing the power really quick, curves well together. You can even put the token on the Ouroboros to speed things up. And then it's also notable that it works pretty well synergy-wise with Bard class, because all your other legendary creatures will enter with a counter on them, and this then makes that get 2 counters. And then obviously you can level this up and start casting Michelangelo for free and stuff like that. So it also speeds up your sort of win con in Bard class, where your creatures are getting even bigger. Plus it's a legendary to take advantage of Mox Amber and stuff too. So I like this card quite a bit, actually. We'll see how it does. I don't know. I think these are the easiest places to slot it in, but it's also, makes an artifact token for 2 mana, so might have some synergy there. This card I'm very interested in. 2 mana, 2/3. You can pay X, it enters and creates X mutagen tokens. Has trample, and then activate abilities of artifact tokens you control cost 1 less to activate. So this is kind of like an interesting take on like a classic Magic Hydra, where like you pay X and it enters with X counters, because you can crack all your mutagen tokens right away to put the counters from them onto this. However, it does some interesting things because you also just get to make a bunch of artifacts. So notably, its ability lets you like crack blood tokens for free, but with something like Biotech Specialist, right? This says when it enters, you create a lander token, and then whenever you sack an artifact, it deals 2 damage. If you can curve these into each other, even if you just like mutagen man for 3, Suddenly you have 3 mutagens. With biotech, you can crack all 3 of those, deal 6 damage to your opponent, and then you're left with, you know, dumping counters on Specialist or Mutagen Man, or, you know, making a giant Trampler, or sort of just pumping your board in general. Kind of cool with Food Fight too, because this gives all your artifacts, deals 1 damage to any target equal to 1 plus the number of permanents named Food Fight you control, and then this makes that cost 1 less. So suddenly, all your artifacts, your mutagen tokens deal 1 damage. I'm sorry, deal 2 damage. With Biotech Specialist, you crack them, they deal 4 damage. I thought that was really interesting. And then everyone knows Dowsing Device, historic staple. I'm just joking, but whenever another artifact you control enters the battlefield, up to 1 target creature you control gets +1/+0 and haste. Then you can transform this artifact to control 4 or more artifacts. That works real well with mutagen, because you're gonna make all these tokens. This gets to pump equal to the amount of tokens. It also gives Mutagen Man haste. You can crack all these if you want and immediately make this into a giant hasty trampler, or you can keep 4 of those tokens around, transform Dowsing Device. I forget what it does on the back, but it turns into a land of some sort, and you get some extra value there. Let me look up what it does. The back, let me throw this up on screen real quick. Transforms. Until end of turn, target creature gains haste and gets +X/+0, where X is the number of artifacts you control. Not too shabby. So these pair really well together. And then, of course, add Food Fight, Biotech Specialist. You can deal a lot of damage out of nowhere with this card. So I'm super excited to play with this one and just try a bunch of different ways to take advantage of those additional artifact tokens. Party Dude is the cheapest class. It's 1 green. When it enters, each player makes a food token. For 2 mana, you level it up, and then it says whenever an artifact an opponent controls put in the graveyard from the battlefield, you draw a card. And then at level 3 for 5 mana, whenever 1 or more of your opponents are attacked, up to 1 target attacking creature gets +X/+X, where X is the number of cards in your hand. So it's a roundabout green card advantage engine, little wonky. It does play kind of cool. We've tried this like mono red road shell with Generous Plunder and Relic Robber on stream, where like Relic or Generous Plunder gives your opponent tap treasures. Relic Robber makes 0/1 colorless goblin things that deal damage to them on their upkeep that also can't be blocked. So like you can just like give your opponent a lot of stuff and deal damage to them. But the cool thing is like if your opponent spends a treasure or board wipes, then you're going to draw a card every time they do that. So hopefully it can sort of balance out and you get to keep your ability to stay ahead of them despite giving them additional resources. Interesting idea. Probably not worth it, but interesting nonetheless. And then also, it's just kind of cool against other things. Like, Yigra, Eater of All, turns all creatures into foods and has ward stacked of food. So, like, your opponent can kill it. They have to sacrifice, you know, a creature they control, which if this is at level 2, you get to draw a card, so you sort of net 0 there. And then same idea with, like, something like Get Lost. You know, they make 2 map tokens, and then if they end up cracking those, you draw 2 cards. And kind of refill your hand. So has some sort of corner cases where it's kind of cool. I don't know if it's good enough just to be playable in general, giving your opponent resources and then late game pumping stuff with cards in your hands. I feel like you're trying to generally empty your hand if you're in some sort of green aggro shell, so it's a little wonky. But it is rather cheap. It's just 1 mana and you get a food token. So we'll see how it does. But we'll probably mess around with it a little bit too. Next up, Go Ninja Go. Real simple. Not much to talk about this one. 2 mana. You get to blink a creature. And you can choose one or both. So you can also deal damage equal to the greatest power among creatures you control to target creature an opponent controls. So it blinks. It fights. But it doesn't actually fight. It just deals damage. It's pretty sweet. It's an uncommon. It's 2 mana. But that's quite a bit of value to, like, ephemerate something. It works kind of cool with Feather the Redeemed. Shout out to Feather. Where you could, like, blink something. I don't know. It turns Feather more into, like, a value engine rather than, like, a combat trick engine, if that makes sense, where like maybe you want to find something to blink like White Orchid Phantom and stuff, and then you can start sniping and remove creatures every single turn, and then at the end Feather will just like bring that back to your hand to do it again next time. So super straightforward, but I just thought it was worth mentioning because that's quite a bit of value for 2 mana. Wrath and Mighty Troublemakers, 7 mana, trample, haste, 7/7. When it attacks, you can reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Put that card on the battlefield, tapped and attacking, the rest of them by any order. Swats right into Indomitable Creativity, Polymorph kind of stuff, Luca, Coppercoat Outcast decks. I don't know if anyone still plays that card, but basically, make sure that you always hit your creature, but it's like a free 7/7. Let's say you're trying to, hit Emrakul. You can Indomitable Creativity for 1. You might spin into Wrath and Mighty. Wrath and Mighty gets to attack, and then you flip and put Emrakul into play. As long as you're just playing 1 of Wrath and Mighty, which I think is probably correct. And then suddenly you're smacking your opponent for 22 damage instead of just 15. Of course, you don't get the Annihilator trigger at that point, but nonetheless, it's in these kinds of shells, it's basically just a free extra 7 damage, especially with the fact that it has Trample. So that's really the only place I see it, in just sort of these decks that are trying to cheat things out, but pretty cool. And now we're getting into some artifacts. Chrome Dome's interesting. This is a 2 mana 1/3, buffs your other artifact creatures for +1/+1. Oh, and then you can create a token that's a copy of another artifact. It gains haste, and then you have to sack your end step, but that's for 5 mana. With something like Chromatic Orrery, I don't know how you're cheating that out. Maybe you're trash for treasuring, maybe you're just ramping like a gamer, but this taps for 5 mana, so you can, I don't know what you want to do with it, but you can, tap Orrery, use that mana to copy Orrery. It's legendary, sack the original, and then you can just make infinite copies of Orrery. If you have something that reduces costs, like Training Grounds out, you could play like Boommobile, where like suddenly it only costs 3 to make a copy of Boommobile with Training Grounds out. So you can pay 3, copy Boommobile. When it enters, you gain 4 mana that you can use to do abilities. And then same idea, you pay 3, copy Boommobile, and then you make infinite Boommobiles and infinite mana that can be activated for those abilities. And then once you have infinite activated ability mana, you can just pump all of that into the exhaust, which this vehicle deals X damage to any target, and you put a counter on this vehicle. So you can just make, 23 mana, pay 23, and just deal 20 to your opponent off of that. I don't know, kind of silly. Also kind of plays well with like Urza and stuff, because you can if you have like a cost reducer or something, you can, make a copy of your construct tokens. They get a buff, and then you can swing with them because they gain haste right away, or you can, I don't know, use them to tap and stuff. If you have double Training Grounds, then you can also just like go in a mono blue shell, play Urza and Chrome Dome. You can play Trackhand Trainer as additional copies, so that way like their abilities only cost 1, so then you can chain together Saga or the Construct tokens, because you could tap them immediately for blue and make a copy of them. So I don't know, I think this card has quite a bit of potential. 5 mana feels about right for the cost, because it's relatively easy to get around it with what we have in Historic, and it already buffs like what you're trying to do. So I think it's honestly more of like a combo-esque card than an aggro card, but we'll probably play a shell that does both. Technodrome is another interesting artifact. 2 mana, reach, trample, can attack or block unless its power is 6 or greater, and then you can sack another artifact, draw a card, and put a counter on this creature. I don't know if anyone remembers it, but way back when, there was a Voltaic Servant Steel Overseer shell that also played Hardened Scales, where you tap this, put a counter, your end step, you get to untap with Voltaic Servant and put another counter on things. We also have Hardened Bonds now, which means you can start like getting more and more creatures and fill your hands. We're also getting Arcbound Ravager, which is just an honorable mention here. Good for Affinity, but like you can also, you know, sack a few things, then move the counters onto Technodrome, turn this into a big boy. It has reach and trample, so it can start swinging in for the beatdowns. But then like this also replaces Steel Overseer if you have a supply of artifacts, which you probably will because you get to draw a card every time you sack. So you can, you know, do this during your turn, untap it with Servant, crack it again end of turn or on your opponent's turn, draw 2 cards, put 2 counters on it. And it's kind of its own like self-fueling engine in like this Hardened Scales artifact kind of counter shell. So I'm actually really excited. I feel like this kind of builds itself. And of course we have some of the like mutagen tokens and some of the other classes and things that have to do with all these counters. So I think, I don't know, it's pretty straightforward, but it's a good card that both grows itself and gives you a win con, but also provides card advantage as you sacrifice your artifacts. And then, like I said, last card, Archbound Ravager is coming to Historic. It's sweet. It's an artifact outlet, sacrifice outlet. That can get real big real quick. Always good to have 2 mana versions of those. And then, of course, it allows some counter manipulation with things like Hardened Scales in these Affinity builds that are running around with, like, Pinnacle Emissary. So you can do quite a bit with this. And I'm excited to see what people decide to shove it into. But that is all from me. Thank you for listening to me ramble. I know I stumble a little bit here or there. Got a lot of ideas going around in my head, but hopefully I sparked some interesting ideas for you. I piqued your interest in some brews and some art type ideas. And you'll have to join us on stream next week, starting on Tuesday, because we will be brewing and playing a lot of the ideas I mentioned on this video today. So no matter whether you like Universes Beyond or not, Plum is a fan of brewing, and I'm always like playing with new cards, so we're gonna be messing around with them anyways. But there's definitely some interesting ones in this set for sure, and I get a little wave of nostalgia, and I think about Vanilla Ice rapping as the ninjas beat down in a club. And I probably should go watch Ninja Turtles Secret of the Ooze after this. But thank you for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye.